And, but what we do know is we do know how to take a critical mass of people, and we know how to start a movement, and we know how to make a difference. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you guys about today. So here's the first thing. If God has called you to plant this church, he has called other people to join you. I learned that really early on, that most of the conversations I had with people were people who felt the burden of a church that reached lost people in our city. Church planters often feel very special. They have a whole conference for us. Exponential is just for us. We are not the only people called to make a difference in our community. We might be the only people brave enough, or honestly, the only people dumb enough to risk everything to plant a church. But if he's called you, he's called other people to join you, right? The burden you feel is felt by other people. So you're not alone in this, and you're not unique in this. The difference is God's called you to lead these people, right? God's called you to pastor these people, which that is the difference. But you're not alone. There are people in your city, there are people in your neighborhood, there's people on your block right now that are going, something's missing. Maybe they don't know it's a church plant. A lot of people are there saying a church plant's missing and someone needs to do this because I can't. You guys just have the courage to do it. But the question is, how do you find people? How do you develop people? And how do you grow that team? And the good news is, like, I'll give you guys some tips, but realistically, it's in the Bible. Nothing I'm telling you comes outside of scripture. If you guys want to know how to grow any church, not just a team, it's in Acts 2. Acts 2, 42 through 47. I'll read that to you now. It says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. If you want to know how to start a movement, a church, anything, Acts 2, 42 through 47. Like, the Bible tells us how churches grow. Growth is biblical, right? Like, you'll meet people along the way who are, when you start trying to grow a team, they'll give you a little pushback, like, why do we need to grow? Well, healthy things grow. Godly things grow. You grow in your faith, right? And movements of people, if they are healthy and good and really rooted in scripture, they'll grow. Maybe it's not numerically, maybe it's spiritual growth, maybe it's reconciliation in growth. Like, that is a reconciliation and redemption are huge growth markers that we often tend to overlook because it's not like always an individual person, but like marriage's healing is growth. But all of that is found in the Bible. And so you read that and you realize, like, we know how to build this team, right? Everything flows out of Acts 2, scripture. They devoted themselves to the apostle teaching, right? Like, they were in the teaching of Jesus, right? And for us, that's like, we're in the word. They had community, right? So they devoted themselves to fellowship. They ate together, right? It wasn't community for the sake of numbers. It was community for the sake of community. They took communion, right? They broke bread. They remembered Jesus' sacrifice. They did that regularly. They prayed, right? It says they devoted themselves to prayer. Like, prayer has to be a part of what you're doing. They served each other, right? It says they sold all their possessions and gave to anybody who had need. Like, part of building a launch team and any team is you need to be serving. You need to be serving in the community. And then my favorite are the last two things that often get overlooked in this is they celebrated. It says they praised God and enjoyed the favor of all people. In this phase that you are in, you have to figure out, what are you celebrating? Like, what wins are you celebrating? And the thing is, in church planting specifically, we have this mindset, butts, bucks, baptisms. Well, guess what? You have no butts and seats because you don't even have seats. You got no money, right? You're trying to get it, but you don't have it. And baptisms are tough in pre-launch if you don't have a good disciple-making culture. It'll happen if you actually have a leadership-driven culture where people are pouring into people. But for us, like, we didn't have a good culture in the beginning. It was all focused on like this launch day. And so in pre-launch, we had a lot of people who didn't know Jesus, who were like getting to know Jesus, but like, it didn't start clicking until I started teaching on Sunday mornings. And what that made me realize was, oh man, I missed out on opportunities in pre-launch to actually teach better, rather than like teaching systems and, vision of the future. But the three things that most churches rely on to see, like, are we successful, it just doesn't happen that much in pre-launch. It can happen, right? There's a church planter named Kevin McNeil down in North Carolina. I think they've already had 3 or 4 baptisms, but he is evangelist to his core. I am not. I'm an introvert. I don't like strangers. They make me feel uncomfortable. To be honest, last year hasn't been too bad because like I don't have to talk to people and I get to wear a mask all the time. I typically have like a pretty angry face, but you know, you wear masks and you don't go inside and like people don't really see it. So this season has been good for my soul in some ways, terrible in others. But you know, those 3 things that like people hit on all the time, like you're not really going to see those, but those aren't the only things that count as wins. So realistically, like you need right now to figure out like, hey, what are we celebrating? Like serving the community, that's a big deal. Conversations with strangers that seem open to what you're doing, that's a win. And those are the things that you need to start celebrating because that's what they did in the Bible. And then the last thing, this is my favorite, probably because I'm a church planner. It said the Lord added to their number daily those who are being saved. So here's the thing. Here's what that means. There were non-Christians present in what they were doing. So often we read those verses and we're like, oh, this is what the church does. And you're like, yeah. But also people who didn't follow Jesus were around. Maybe they're in the meals. Maybe they're just the ones being served. Either way, the Lord can't add to their number daily those who are being saved if people who are unsaved aren't a part of that. So every single time I talk to church planners, I ask them like, hey, are you around people who don't know Jesus? And most of the time they're like, no. And it's like, yeah. So like, you're not doing, not just church planting, you're not doing what the church did. Right. And so if you know, so a lot of times it's like, you know, they're trying to find success and stuff. And you're like, hey, look at Acts 2:42 through 47. How are you building these things into your culture as a church? Right. And this isn't like a growth track. You guys don't need to do like here's the 10 steps to be, that's not what that is. Right. For me in the beginning, we'd pray as a group, but realistically I had 5 people that love me dearly, who are prayer people, right? Because not everybody's a prayer person, but I had my 5 prayer people, and every single week I sent them a list like, here's what you need to be praying for. And the thing is, it wasn't like pray that our team grows. It was, hey, I'm really struggling emotionally right now because this is hard. Can you pray for me? And so the thing is, it's like not every person is going to do everything, but you find the right people and not everybody's servant hearted, right? And that's fine. I mean, it's probably not fine, but realistically, like you find your best people that serve and you let them build that momentum and let other people kind of follow that. So again, I'll give you things, but we could stop right now and you guys have what you need. You just got to figure out how it fits with what you're doing. But you know, I'm a church planner, so I want to keep talking. So like I said, you know, we did this, a lot of this stuff I learned afterward. I didn't have this beforehand. And so a lot of this has been created like post us launching this church. One thing I would say before we get into like the 10 things you should do and the 5 things you shouldn't is, so that number 40, like I'm sure you guys have heard it, like you got to build a launch team, that number is 40. So we had 50 adults and 20 something kids when we launched our church. Here's the thing. If you have 40, not all 40 of those people will do anything. So what we learned is like, we're like, okay, got to get to 40. And then we're like, we got up to like 55. This is great. And then Collective started, and of the 55, only 35 ever showed up to actually do anything productive. And so that 40 number is important, but it's less important when you realize the reason why we say 40 is because about 75% of those people are actually involved and invested, right? And so for those of you who are starting different types of movements, it's saying, hey, maybe it's not like massive, but it's saying like, hey, I need to figure out like, here's what I need. But realistically, I need to know, like, I need 30 people who are actually serving. You can start a church with 30 people who serve regularly on Sunday morning. But the thing is, when you have 40, not all 40 do it. That was one of the hardest things that I learned in launching this church was like, we got that number. And I was like, yeah. And then we started and I'm like, what happened to these 17 people? And the thing is like, they joined it because they thought it was cool. They joined it because they liked it. They liked the pre-launch stuff, you know, the event stuff. They showed up at events. But then when you start turning that table and go, hey, this is no longer about how you can be filled up, but how you can fill up other people. You know, 30% of ours were like, I'm out, right? Because people don't want to do that. You know, we talk about serving on the team as us pouring into people. Realistically, mature Christians know that us serving actually fills us up as well. Most of the people you're reaching do not understand that. That is a level of like woke Christianity that you have to bring people to. That, hey, like it's actually, and I will say things that you won't agree with, and I understand it's okay. I'm not mad. I would even go as far to say it is a sin to not serve other people, right? If we think about the word sin, it's missing the mark. It's walking out of alignment with what God teaches. Like, tell me how you choosing not to serve someone isn't sinful, right? We focus on like the other stuff, like lying and murder and like adultery, all that. But like at the root of it, isn't choosing not to serve others people walking out of alignment with what God wants for us. And the thing is, like, you say that out loud and Christians will cringe. They disagree. I mean, guys, let's talk. Hey, if you don't give to a church, if you're not tithing, is that sinful? You know, we might not say that on a Sunday morning, but realistically, let's talk about what that means. God gives us the Bible. He tells us how to live. Do we or do we not follow that? But the thing is, the people that you're building onto your team, most people don't have kind of that thinking and that understanding, right? So part of what you do is you don't just build numbers, you build people up to get to that place where you're like, hey, serving is a Christian duty. You know, I don't know how you can sit in church and not serve and be like, yo, I follow Jesus. That doesn't make sense to me. But, you know, again, you don't have to agree with everything that I say. You know, I'm not always right. So with that being said, though, not everybody that's going to be on your team is going to show up in the end. I don't know why. It's disappointing. But that's why that number is so important, because of the 40, 30 actually are involved. But again, you guys kind of got to figure that out for your own context, like figure out that math. If there's different kind of context for like missional movements, I would say that those numbers probably still translate. If they're like, yeah, you've got to have 12 leaders, that's probably because realistically only 8 of them actually kind of invest and kind of move those things forward. That would be my guess. All right, so let's jump into the 10 things you should do and the 5 things you shouldn't. And I'm going to kind of rapid fire through these things, but feel free at any point. I'm looking at a document on my screen, so I'm not always looking at you guys. I'm totally fine with you unmute yourself and just say, hey, hold up. And then if not, like I said, we'll get to the end and you guys can ask some questions. So number 1, and some of you guys have already moved, but this kind of still translates. You need to ask people to move with you. Same thing of like, you need to actually ask people to join you. You need to be bold. 2 Timothy 1 says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. Do not assume churches will send people with you. Man, I'm born and raised in this area. I did the whole preaching tour. Like, hey, come talk, come share, come this. And not one church sent anybody with us. Because here's the truth. The people that would come with us were people that were involved in those other churches, and no church actually wants people to leave. I mean, let's be real. Like, they're going to say, you know, if you live in Frederick, you should go. But what they're really saying is, hey, if you don't serve at our church and live in Frederick, you should go. Now, with that being the case, though, you still should do the preaching circuits. You should still talk to other churches. You should still talk to other nonprofits. Because even though nobody came with us originally, 3 years later, a lot of people have moved out our way. And they're like, hey, I remember when you came to our church 3 years ago, and we knew we were moving to Frederick, and I've been holding on to that. Some of our best leaders are people who didn't come opening day, but moved to Frederick a year later. And immediately they're like, this is where I want to go. Because of that church connection, they felt safe, and because they kind of got to see my face. So it's still worth it, but just don't set your hopes on it. Specifically, also, if you're doing what we did, which was parachute, meaning like we just went and jumped in, versus like a hive where they're going, you and 50 people need to go. That's a whole other thing that I can't really speak to. I think parachute's better, but that's just my opinion. Don't assume that your friends and family are going to help you or are going to move with you. You need to challenge them and ask them to be a part of it. So we asked 25 people to move with us. Only 8 people did. Those 8 people at this point are leaders at Collective. One of them is our first elder. He preaches 4 or 5 times a year for me. One of them, his wife runs our finance team. The other 2, Maggie is one of her. She sings pretty much every week. Chris, her husband, runs our tech team. They're my closest friends. All 4 of them are. And then we've got this couple named DJ and Kaylee, who moved from Florida. to help us. DJ is one of our group leaders. He leads our youth collective and he hosts on Sunday mornings. His wife helps us with next steps. My sister and her husband moved. She does all of our social media or all of our digital content. These are some of our 8 best people. They're some of our most generous people. Like that's 8 of 25, but those 8 people who said yes, like they wanted it and they made a huge difference, and we wouldn't be where we are without them. Those people are leaders. To be honest, the 17 people who said no, they regret it, but I made them say no to my face. One of my best friends from childhood, met him at New Life. He actually works now at Grace Cove, which is a church right across the street. He wanted to be in ministry, and I was like, I can get you in ministry. I was like, move with me. And he was like, man, I don't know. And like, he was working at some government thing for a while. And I was like, move. Like, I'll give you that right. I was like, I'm not gonna pay you, but like, you want to preach, I'll let you preach. You want to lead, I'll let you lead. Like, you can help the culture of this church. And I made him sit down at dinner and look me in the eye and tell me no. And I was like, okay, and we're not friends anymore. I'm just kidding. We're still friends. But it was a big thing for him because, he wanted something different. And that was a big clarifying moment for him where he turned us down. And I said, okay, well, now that you said no to us, you need to go back to Grace Cove, which is where he was attending. And you need to sit down with your leaders and say, listen, guys, I'm turning down this opportunity to start a church because I feel like God's called me here. So use me. And now he's on staff, right? So like, and I'm not taking credit for that, but like that clarifying moment for him was a big deal. And so you need to get those clarifying moments from your people. Make them say no to you. And, love them anyways. We have a lot of friends who said no and then now are like, man, I really wish we could. And like, do it, move, and so we're trying to convince a really good friends of ours from Annapolis, Maryland, to move up here because they're not happy where they're at. And they work jobs where COVID shut them down and they work remote now. Like, this is great, but make them say no to you. Get an answer from them. And the same is true, not just for people that move, but any part of this process for you guys. Like, don't do these wishy-washy commitments where people are like, you think they're in, but you're not sure they're in. You need to have clarifying conversations. Brene Brown says, clear is kind. And I repeat that all day long to my staff, clear is kind. Here's more advice you didn't ask for. Burnout doesn't happen because people serve too much. That's not a thing. We're not built to not serve, right? God created us to serve people and to be in community. People are like, I'm burnt out because I'm serving too much. They're burnt out because there's a lack of clarity and because there's unmet expectations. From both sides, you have expectations for them that they're not meeting and they know that, or they have expectations for you that you're not meeting, but either way, you're not talking about them. And so clarity, get clarity. Hey, do you want to be a part of this team? Here's what that means. Not just do you want to be a part of this team, like here's what it means to be a part of this team. We serve together, we expect this, whatever it may be, you kind of got to make a decision on that. So you ask people to move with you. Number 2, and this is
Michael, could you go back and just say that one more time? The burnout doesn't happen because of lack of clarity and
yeah. So, if you served in a church at all, people are like, I'm just burnt out, I want to stop serving. And I've realized that that's crap. Burnout doesn't come from serving too much. Because again, God created, it's like saying, yeah, I'm tired of being in community. I'm in too much community. It's like, no. You're created to be in community. You're tired because you have the wrong community or you have shallow community, right? Like you could be in community, but could still be toxic. God created us to serve other people. God created us to lay ourselves down for other people. So when people tell you, oh, I'm burnt out because I'm serving too much, it's not because the actual act of service, it's because there's a lack of clarity. Like it's because there's unmet expectations. As Jim Collins puts it, it's because they're in the wrong seat on the bus, right? But again, that's a clarity thing, right? If there's clarity of here's what my expectations are, if there's clarity from them of here's what my expectations of you are, which is so hard in ministry because everybody has different expectations of their pastor. But either way, like, and this is something that I've been developing for the last few months as we think about burnout. It just really comes down to people feel burnout because they think they're failing at something or, they're not sure if they're doing a good job. And it just all comes down to there's no clarity, right? The reason why 33% of our launch team didn't show up to actually serve, maybe because they're selfish, maybe because they're looking for something different. But a big piece of that was there wasn't enough clarity from us saying, here's what we expect you to do if you're a part of this team. We felt like we were clear, but looking back, like you can always be clear, right? So clear is kind. So number two, we did not do this. So learn from me. Be a pastor. From the moment you start, you are a pastor. In the beginning, I was like, I'm a church planter. And yeah, that's true. But like, you never stop leading people and loving people and caring for people. You are a pastor to your team, to your family, like your actual family, and to the people who are checking it out. So you have to make sure that you're actually pouring into your initial core group of people. Before we ever had small groups, we started Saturday worship with 6 people, with 6 of the people who move with us. And because it wasn't just about like, hey, we got to get to this big day. It was like, hey, we're a church. There's 6 of us. Let's take communion together. Let's pray together. Because the healthier they are spiritually, the stronger your team will be. Carrie Newhoff wrote a blog post called Growing Churches Develop and Empower More Leaders. And they did a study and they said that growing churches have 1 leader for every 11 people in attendance, which makes sense because, Jesus. A lot of churches are like, our leaders lead 16 to 22. It's like, cool. Jesus had 12. Yeah, there are other people around, but he really poured into 12. And of that, there are really 3. But for some reason, we feel like we can create culture and models that are different. Declining churches have 1 leader for every 19 people in attendance. We're talking 8 people, but we're also talking the difference between what Jesus did and what we think we can do as, normal people who, to be honest, have a lot of issues. And what that means isn't hire more staff. What that means is develop more leaders. You have to develop leaders. You have to develop leaders. You have to develop leaders. And that starts in pre-launch. So launch team building isn't just about new people. It's also about casting vision and developing new leaders. If you simply look at your pre-launch time as time to get all your tasks done, that's all you'll do. And you'll launch a church where you are the central figure and people will treat you that way. The sooner you can develop a system where you have other people leading small groups, the better your church will be. If you do not develop leaders, you will be the leader for everyone and you will not make it, right? Develop leaders. And honestly, guys, what that means is putting people in place that follow Jesus, but can't do it as well as you can. Also, if we're being honest, a lot of times you're like, well, they can't do it as well as I can. But what we're really saying is they can't wing it as well as I can. We're not that good at what we do. We just have a strong sense of like, all right, but at least we know the direction we're in. You can find people who can do it 80% as well as you. And those are the people you got to put into play. These people really, if they're leaders, they should be giving, they should be serving. You shouldn't have to pull them into serving. They should have a servant's heart. But you need to develop leaders from the start, because if not, when you launch your church and, say 100 people show up, you don't have enough leaders to do small groups for 100 people. So who leads the small groups? You do. Is that good? No. You might lead a good discussion, but you will not develop leaders because you won't have the margin to do that. So start developing people early and start handing things off early. There were 6 of us, and I was like, okay, I'm not leading the first small group. You 2 are. Didn't make sense. Like, I don't like leading small groups. That's not my thing. Like, I've done it long enough. I don't want to do it anymore. And so we had somebody, and it was like, you're going to do it. And, then it was like, also, I'll help you develop the next leader, but you need to develop the next leader. And we did okay with that. I would tell you that we were more of a staff-driven organization when we first started, because one of our staff members was a high capacity person and I could lean on him a lot. But then he resigned 8 weeks in, and it was like, oh man, I've relied on him too much. And I had to start developing leaders. So this is something we learned because of a mistake and because of, you're an 8-week-old church and your only other full-time person resigns. Also, he was raising his full salary. So it wasn't like we had the money. What do you do? To be honest, like, we looked at it and go, oh, okay, this is the end. Like, we die. We get to Christmas and we die. But what we did was I sat down, I pulled in 10 of our best people, and I said, hey, you guys aren't really leading right now, but I need you to take things. And it was like, talk to a guy named Dylan. Dylan, I need you to pick music, because the guy who resigned was worship. And I was like, John, I need you to sing. And we just had to figure it out. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't smooth. A lot of people were like, this feels disorganized. And it's like, yeah. Like, I didn't prepare for this, and I'm sorry. But the quicker I developed leaders, the better our church came. Today, we have 55 leaders who lead groups and teams on Sunday mornings and all that. And our church is better because of it. And I really do believe that's one of the reasons why we grew, was because I don't lead a small group. We have 11 of them. I don't lead it. I attend a small group. I let somebody who is not a pastor disciple me, you know, because I need to set that tone, and he's great at it. So you need to develop leaders. You need to be a pastor. Number 3, love your community. From the moment you get there, start serving. It doesn't need to be big events. You know, you don't need to do the big thing. You can do small things. The main thing is this: you just need to be present, right? You need to ask your community about the needs. You need to reach out to nonprofits. You need to be present in your city and get your hands dirty. Most of the places where you live, and it doesn't matter if it's the US or outside of the US, when you show up and say, hey, we're a church and we want to serve, most nonprofits will go, cool, the last church that reached out to us didn't actually show up, or the last church that, and it's all day long, you'll hear this like, yeah, that's nice of you, but they have the lowest expectations of churches, because churches overpromise and underdeliver. And so the best thing you can do is just show up, right? Commit to being there and actually be there, you know, and that's a whole thing. I can soapbox churches all day long and how they've really done a damage to the church. But again, just be present, show up, communicate. Like, just be a good citizen is really what it is. But you can do that before you ever have people. It could just be you. Find an organization that needs help. Find an organization where you have a skill set or a desire that can be a blessing to them, and serve. Number 4, be intentional. What this meant for us was like, always have something else that the person can take a next step to, right? A lot of times when you start an organization, you do this one-time thing. You're like, hey, we did this really cool Valentine's event. Okay, what's next, right? Because it's assimilation the whole way through. Not everybody shows up at church and decides, oh, I'm going to join a group that week, and then I'm going to join the team, then I'm going to get back. Like, it doesn't always work that way. Some people need more time. And the same thing is true for pre-launch when it comes to getting people to a place where they feel comfortable being a part of what you're doing. So you need to be intentional. You need to know, hey, what are we doing next? What are we sending people to? Like, you know, it's cool that we did this barbecue. What's the next thing we're doing? Okay, the next thing we're doing is next month we're going to the rescue mission and we're going to serve in this way. And then you get to the rescue mission and say, hey, the next thing that we're doing is we'll see at our small group on Tuesday night. You need to make sure that you're thinking through the next steps for people, like connecting them to the next thing. It can't just be these pop-up things that exist and they go, oh, that was great. And you go, okay, see ya, you know, follow us on social media for the next thing, right? Whenever you plan one event, whenever you plan one meeting, whenever you plan one thing, you need to know what's the next thing that I'm trying to get people to. Because ultimately some people it takes 5 steps for them. It's just like faith, guys. Sometimes it's 5 times, 5 weeks, 5 groups, whatever it may be. Sometimes it's 20. Sometimes it's 2 years. But the thing is, if all you're doing is this like one and done events and not helping people move, like, what are you doing? That's church. Like, ultimately, everything I say is like, whether it's with a Sunday morning and like lights and stuff, or whether it's in a living room, it's the same. The things that you know, they start earlier than, you know, when you can do Sunday morning and preach on a stage with a microphone, right? You want to help people move forward in their faith, move forward in their growth. And the way that you do that is that you're intentional. You think through what's next. And I would tell you, just like an extra thing, it can't always be the same thing. You know, you can't always do like, hey, we're only serving the community. Because again, Acts 2, right? You got to make sure you have community in there where you guys just eat together. You got to have things in there where you serve. You got to have things in there where you cast vision and you bring clarity into what you're asking them to do. You need to have times where you just celebrate, you know, and some of these things can match up, but ultimately you just need to intentionally help move people forward. And again, no different than when, you know, you start your organization, which realistically you start it from the moment you start it. It's not, you know, we launched on September 17th. We had a whole year before we launched where we did ministry. I wish I thought about it differently then. Like, now it's different. I've learned, like, oh man, like, we say we launched on the 17th, and so we're 3 years old. Collective's really a 4-year-old church. And I wish I would have known that a little bit more before like the big day came. Number 5, this one's my favorite. Be creative. So whether you realize it or not, you're being compared to other churches, other nonprofits, other parachurches, whatever it may be. If you can't do something better than them, do something different. I'm going to say that again. If you can't do something better than the churches around you, do something different. The example I give every single time is Easter egg stuff. Every Easter, you got that church that's got the helicopter. If you can't do it better than a helicopter, don't do it. Do something different. Do something more intentional. And what I'm saying is that doesn't mean you don't do an Easter thing. Just do it differently, right? So like there are churches that they rent a blimp and they drop 1 million eggs full of gold. And you're like, man, I can't do that. But what I can do is I can go to a park that's in a low income neighborhood. What I can do is I can go to a community that nobody wants to be in, and I can create something special for those people. What I can do is, New Life does this where it's like, hey, we're not getting the helicopter, but I can get them in our building. And I can do an Easter egg drop on the fields here where the anxiety of showing up at church starts to go away when they realize, oh, I've already been there before. I already know how to drive there. I know how to park there. I know where to walk because I went for the Easter egg thing, right? So like, if you can't do it better, just do something different, And so for us, what that meant is in pre-launch, we didn't have a location, but we knew we needed to do something for Christmas. And it was like, well, we're not gonna do something on Christmas Eve because every church in Frederick's doing something on Christmas Eve. So the Sunday before, it was like December 22nd or 23rd, we did what we called the pop-up Christmas Eve service. It was smaller. We did a hot chocolate bar where you come in, we did custom mugs and you grab your custom mug and it was like a whole thing full of hot chocolate. We built some community in at the front end. And then we did a small Christmas Eve service. But the thing is, we weren't trying to do it at the same time as everything else because we knew like, man, if they had to choose between this church that isn't really real with this pastor who they've never heard preach before and a band that doesn't really exist, or the big thing down the road where Jesus descends from heaven on a cross and they pull him back up or whatever they're doing. Let's just do something special and unique. Let's do something on a different night and kind of feed the soul of those people so that they don't have to choose. For us, a big thing was we have a lot of young adults. So it was like, I don't want them to have to choose between Christmas Eve with their mom and their dad and their grandma and what we're doing. So let's do something on Christmas Eve. We still do that today. We did that online. We did a Christmas Eve and a Christmas Eve service because the thing is like, we got a lot of people that this is their church home, but they have a tradition of going to church with their mom and dad. So why create ways to where they have to make that choice? Like create opportunities where they can do both. And what happens is weird. This is so weird for us. So we started doing that year one. We did Christmas Eve and Eve. And now what you'll see is like our young adults, they bring their parents to our Christmas Eve service, and then they'll go to their parents' Christmas Eve service. And a lot of those parents who came to our service are like, wait a second, I don't hate this. Yeah, the dude's young, but like he's not that young, almost 35. But a lot of the fears that they had about church planting or our church, that when they see it, they go, oh man, there's something going on here. And maybe I can be a part of this too. And so the thing is like, if you can't do it better than them, just do something different, and really that means better, but do something intentional. And so for us, we serve at an organization called the Downtown Frederick Partnership, and no churches served with them. So they do a thing called First Saturday. You get to set up a booth. No churches would do it. And I'm like, well, this is dumb. We're going to do it. So we started with doing these little rock painting things. It's called Frederick Rocks. You hashtag Frederick Rocks. You put them all over the city. And we didn't start that. Somebody else did. But we're like, dude, like people can sit at a booth with us. They can paint these rocks and they take them with them and kids love it. And so we started doing that. And then what ended up happening was other churches started showing up at these events and doing that same thing. Churches are not creative and unique and original. Don't know why. We're built on creativity and art. And for whatever reason, 200 years ago, Christians were like, nah, let's just imitate everything instead of creating everything, which is, again, another soapbox I can go. My wife's a painter, so I'm very passionate about art. So other churches started doing rock paintings. So we're like, well, this is dumb. We're not gonna do that anymore. So what we did was we went to a printer and like, hey, can you print out magnets that people can draw on? And so we did that, the skyline of our city, and you can sit down with us now and you can color in the skyline of our city because people love our city more than they love rocks, right? And when that gets taken, we'll do something else. But the thing is like, we're not gonna do the same thing as other churches, right? We're gonna try to do something different, try to do something intentional, try to do something thoughtful. We're gonna be creative. Everything that we do, when we do things in the community, it's not like a lot of church planners will be like, we hand out koozies. you know what people do when you hand things out? They take them and they leave. But do you know what they have to do when they paint rocks? When they color magnets, they sit down. They sit down and you have a conversation. Their kid sits down and you have your best volunteer talking to that kid and you talk to the parents. You know, like don't not just because churches do it doesn't mean it's good, right? Everything that we do when we serve in the community, we want to create an opportunity with 5 minutes with those people, right? But if you hand things out, they just take it and they go. But we know if we can sit down with somebody and we can tell them the heart of this church and they can get to know our people, not me, our people, they're going to be interested in checking this place out. And so create opportunities for that to happen. Number 6, stack the deck. This is something that most church planners won't tell you, but when you host events, stack the deck. Your friends who didn't move with you to help you start the church will almost do anything else you ask them to. And so those 17 people who said no, I said, okay, we're hosting a vision night this Sunday. Do you want to come up, have dinner with us? But then can you come to this thing? Can you meet people there? And you can tell them, hey, I'm from Annapolis and actually I'm not moving here, but we just believe in what they're doing. We financially support them from afar and we're here to see how everything's going. But like what you need to do is when you create events and you create opportunities for people to show up, like ask people to be with you, you know, and it's one of the most safe things that you could do is just say, I did that with my family. I was like, hey, you know, with my sisters, I was like, hey, I know at the time I didn't think they'd be a part of Collective. I was like, but can you help us? Can you show up at things? At that pop-up Christmas Eve service, I called Sean. I was like, hey man, can you come to our Christmas Eve service? And Sean came and he brought people. So like we have all these pictures and it's like, that's my dad, that's my mom, there's Sean. Most people who are like not a part of Collective, but Sean came and he met people, he talked to people, he shared like, yeah, we're their supporting organization, we believe in them. But what you can do when you do events and grand openings and your first small group is like stack the deck, get people to come with you. You know, part of that is like we have friends who are pastors who showed up, you know, because part of it is like people just need to see that people are there. And eventually some of those people actually turned into team members for us. They were like, yeah, that 30-minute drive wasn't too bad, you know. But what you can do is you can get people there that believe in what you're doing that aren't brand new. And this helps create momentum. Also, to be honest, like they're your biggest fans and you need that in the beginning. You need people who, when you're teaching or talking or sharing, that aren't looking at you like you're crazy. It's good. I mean, my mom came. It was just good to look at my mom every once in a while when I'm like, oh, these 20 people hate me because they're not sure about Jesus. And I think they're here because they just want to yell at me, but there's my mom. You know, my mom's not going to hate me. So part of it is like, I tell people stack the deck, and we still do this at Collective. When we do events or when we post things on social media that we're trying to get some momentum on, we message our best leaders and say, hey, we're going to post this thing on Tuesday. Here's what we need you. We need you to, you know, respond to this, but also we need you to participate in this. So we do this thing where during different holidays, our Collective Kids team will challenge families to put things on like porches. But we never just challenge people to put things on porches. We reach out to our best families and say, hey, we're going to challenge people to put things on porches. And we would like for you to do that. So when we post that, then can you show how you're doing that? You know, we still stack the deck because people need to see other people are doing it before they jump in. Extroverts will do whatever, you know, but like a lot of introverts, like they need to see, is this safe? Can I do this? And so what we do is we stack the deck. We try to create momentum with people who believe in what we're doing, and we still do that. Number 7, host preview services. And again, you got to figure out what that context looks like, but you should have some sort of practice. You need to practice what you're doing. You need to show people what it's going to look like. We did 4, which is more than a lot of churches, but like I coach church planners to do 4 or more. They were private, but people could invite their friends. It allowed us to practice. It helped us cast more vision. You know, a big piece of that is like, it just allowed us to work through some of the things that we didn't know we needed to work through. We're actually doing that right now. Like you can go to My Collective Church on social media, and we're live on Sunday mornings in our building right now for the month of February with no guests. Because it's like, we don't have to have guests. Like we got to practice this stuff. And there was a lot that went well on Sunday. There was a lot that didn't go well on Sunday. It snowed. We'd never figured out how to clear off a parking lot, but thankfully we had a practice service. We learned how to clear the parking lot, you know, learned how to call the people who are supposed to clear our parking lot. But you should do some sort of practice, soft launch, soft run, you know, practice with people who you trust so they can give you feedback. One of the things that we did at our preview services is we're like, hey, if you fill out a connection card, I'm going to send you a survey and I want you to tell us what you liked and what went well. And I want you to tell us things that we can improve. And that is an incredibly vulnerable place to be. But we did it, and we gave them Starbucks if they filled it out. We sent them a digital Starbucks gift card, and we got great feedback. People are like, "Hey, your parking signs were confusing." Well, do you know what I've never done at Collective? I've never parked at Collective because I am the pastor here. I don't know, and we're fixing that. That's a bad culture. Don't do that. But like I never drove onto the property before we launched. I mean, I did. I drove it, but not with the signs because I was preaching. I was pulling our trailer. Like I was getting there at 6:30 in the morning. Like you don't know how to park in your spaces. You don't know what it's like to walk in those doors. You don't know what it's like to check in your kids at a normal time. That's what practice services are for. And you ask people to help give you feedback on that. I would also, going back to Stack the Deck, ask people that you like to come and do that and give you feedback. There are a bunch of guys from New Life that came up, through the 4 weeks. And I was like, just come and bring your kids and tell us how it went. And feedback's hard, but part of being a leader is that you get feedback from people that you trust, as well as people that, maybe you don't trust, but you take it with a grain of salt and you try to figure out like what they're trying to say with that. Number 8, celebrate wins. We already talked about this, but like, you've got to figure out what a win is to you, right? Like Exponential talked about this a few years ago, the scorecard. You determine your own scorecard. We do a meeting every single Monday called Scorecard Meeting. We talk about baptisms. We talk about baptisms for the year and baptisms coming up, and then baptisms for our church. Because just because they happened 3 years ago, it doesn't mean we should stop celebrating them. We talk about people serving for the first time, because that's a big deal. We talk about people in small groups. We talk about overall, like what our team culture is like. We talk about attendance, but the thing is, like, we determine that scorecard. We determine what we value. We talk about churches that are being planted. We talk about leaders that are being developed. Like, those are our wins, but you need to determine your wins. Do not let somebody else determine those for you. God put that on you to start this thing. Okay. You know what those wins are. Celebrate those wins. And also that creates culture for the future. What you celebrate gets repeated. If one of your wins is invitation, the more you celebrate that, the more people will invite. It's just that simple. And so you guys got to figure out what are your wins, determine your wins, and celebrate those things. Going back to one of the things I mentioned earlier, when it came to ask people to move with you, same thing, ask for commitments. Like, you need to ask for commitments. One of my pet peeves is when it comes to church planners who are not bold. Like, God, you felt God call you to a city to fight hell. Like, putting it bluntly, like, you felt this calling, this burden, this push, this divine moment to start something to reach lost people. But what you're really saying is, I'm coming there because this is the biggest battle we have in this world, and I need to fight what hell is doing. If God has called you to do that, you need to be bold. How can you move but not feel the courage to ask somebody to join your team? God called you to uproot your life, but you don't think you can sit down and say, hey, I'd love for you to be a part of this. Doesn't make sense, right? And I know it's nerve-wracking, and it's not easy. I'm not saying it is, but I'm just saying it doesn't make sense. You guys feel that burden. That burden comes through from the moment you move to the moment you stop doing what you're doing. And then number 10, be detailed. One of the guys I'm coaching right now, he is the most outgoing person I've ever met. But I constantly ask him, what is your plan? I constantly ask him, what are you doing at Easter? What are you doing in the fall? When are you trying to start more small groups? Because the thing is, it doesn't matter if you can meet a lot of people and reach a lot of people. When they get into your organization, if it's disorganized, they are not interested. I know that burden is more so like for where I live, right? People in my area, they are smarter than I am. They have more degrees than I do. They make more money than I do. They are incredibly structured people. If we are disorganized, they will not stick around. Right. And so what that means is, like, and we have documents on documents on documents, but we track everything, right? We track every number that you can track, every detail you can track. We have a thing every Monday where we talk about our team, and we talk, did anybody gain team members? Okay. You gained some people. What's the story? How'd you meet them? How did you connect with them? Was it a connection card? Was it a personal conversation? Was it someone who's been around for a while and it was like the husband of, and they just took some time? But then we also talk about people that we've lost. Okay. Who stepped out of serving and why? They had kids. They had a kid. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. They're afraid of COVID. Okay. That makes sense. They're burnout. Okay. Whoa. That's a trigger word. Burnout is not a thing. So what's going on? And what we do is we have a staff member who kind of oversees our team. And I'll say, hey, Danielle, can you call Johnny and call Johnny and Tess and just see like, hey, they're stepping back from serving, but just see how they're doing. Because really it's going to come down to they're overwhelmed. They're not going to tell you all that, but like we've got to dig into that. And so be detailed. And so we have this list every single week. We go through it: gained, lost, moved out of state. We do the same thing with our giving, all that. What you measure is what matters. What are you keeping details on? A big piece of it too in pre-launch is we had a whole spreadsheet of people that we had met. Every person we met in those 9 months was on a spreadsheet, and it was, their name, whether they joined the team, whether they said no to us joining the team, what conversations we've had with them. Because the thing is, just because you meet somebody doesn't mean they're going to do it. But we had this whole spreadsheet where it's like, oh man, I sat down with this person, we had coffee, and I haven't seen them since then. Like I've got to reach back out. And most of our people that joined the team were like, man, like, I don't know why you're doing this, but like, if this is the culture of that church, like I'll check it out. And so you need to be detailed. So those are the 10 things you should do.
So Michael, with that spreadsheet, is that the spreadsheet basically where you're having like, kind of like, I think Carl Cool had like the red, yellow, green, saying like, okay, red means they said no, yellow means we're pursuing them, they haven't committed yet, green means, they're on the team and you're trying to move them to the left.
Yep. Yeah. Again, it's assimilation. It's no different. And we do the same thing now as a church where we have our list, like our roster of team, but then we also have a whole bunch of people next to it that are like, these people have been around for a while, but they're not serving, or these people are giving, but they're not serving. Like they're obviously invested or at least interested in what we're doing. What follow-up conversations do we need to have? So that culture is continued on where we don't just look at the people that are on it. We also look at, hey, why have people left it? And why aren't they on it yet? Because a lot of times it's just you've never asked, to be honest. Most extroverts, they're like, what can I check a box for? Everything. I'm going to do everything. But introverts, like 9 times out of 10, they don't join things unless you sit down with them and just say, hey, like, I see this in you. I think this would be good for you. Like, have you ever thought about, serving on this team or joining this group or whatever it may look like. So yeah, like we have this incredible spreadsheet. What's nuts about it is like, I wish I could show it to you guys. Like it's somewhere on my computer and I don't have time to find it. There are people on the list of like maybe who, when we launched this church, were like, man, like they never showed up to launch. We met them, but they never showed up to things. Multiple of those people, one of them is a staff member now because they ended up showing up opening day. One of them's our number 2 elder, our second elder coming into play, because these are people who through this process, even though they never jumped in pre-launch, they were people that we reached out to and had conversations with. And eventually for both those people, it was just that the pre-launch stuff like freaked them out. What do you mean you're starting a church? Like, who are you? Like, you seem kind of crazy. This whole thing is weird. But once we started and they could see it, they're like, oh, I get it now. And actually both people are like very much introverted. They're not starting new things and they just wanted to see it before they could join it. And it's one of the best things that we have. We've baptized people on that list. Again, not everybody joined right away, but there are people who we're intentionally praying for, praying about, talking to, having conversations with. God will do what he does, right? But the thing is, like, if you're just meeting people and going, all right, see ya, that's never going to happen. And I know like a lot of what I'm talking about for building a team, it sounds like part of like, and Chad can speak to this too, like the kind of the missional disciple making movement. But the thing is like, that can happen when you start a church and before you start a church. Like the conversations are always supposed to be a part of this. For us, we call that church planting, but depending on what you're doing, like it's just called like reaching people, and these things kind of continue on.
Yeah. It's kind of like, having a tool that just keeps those people in front of you in your mind and your attention and your prayers. For Chad, the disciple making movement, one of the tools is an oikos map. It's kind of thinking about, so you're seeing the people and their relationships and who they are. And so you can kind of always keep them at the forefront of your mind and your prayers. So,
I one thing I'm building into our new space, you can see my whiteboard behind me, is every single week, if I feel like God is putting someone on my heart, I'm going to write their name down and I'm going to pray for them, but I'm also going to reach out to them. And I literally did this yesterday to a girl who, she actually used to be my admin and had to resign because she couldn't do online school with her kids because they have some behavioral issues. And she was like, I can't work while they watch a screen all day. In fact, their doctor was like, your kids can't watch screens all day because they lose their minds. So she had to resign to do homeschooling. But a few months ago, she was diagnosed with cancer. And I called her one day. I was actually just found out, I was actually at New Life doing an assessment for church planners. And one of the older women in our church had died. And so I was calling this girl, her name was Tabby. I was like, hey, because Tabby was my assistant. She was in the lobby with me every Sunday for the first 2 years. So I called Tabby. I was like, hey, Tabby, I just got to tell you, like, Joanne passed away. And Joanne and Tabby were super close. And Tabby's like, this is weird. I don't know why you're calling me, but I literally just got diagnosed with cancer. I hadn't talked to her in like 2 months, 3 months, short of like seeing her around at some stuff. And so, obviously that was a very sad phone call. Cried a lot. Tabby is the reason why our church is where we are, is because of people like her. And, but we had a good conversation that day. And, my wife and I, we've texted, we brought him dinner a few times. And yesterday I literally, like, I'm driving home and I just felt like God was saying, you need to text Tabby. So I texted her and I was like, hey, like, we missed you on Sunday. I was like, hey, my job is way harder without you being here. But I hope you're doing well. And she's like, Michael, I just got called from the doctor. I am cancer free. And the thing is, like, God puts people on your heart. And some of you are like me, where God puts people on your heart and you're like, oh man, this person, oh crap, I got to go do this other thing. So my spreadsheet was my way of saying, God, put these people in my life for I don't know what reason, but I'm going to put their name down because this is a better way for me to remember that. It's a better way for me to look at that. And so that culture still exists when it comes to our team. But for me, I'm building that culture right now where it's like, if God gives you that nudge, figure out what that means. And then God will do that the whole way through. Again, this is not a pre-launch thing. This is just a Christian thing and realistically a pastoral thing. God's going to put people on your heart that you need to call and say, will you come do this with me? Will you come start this thing with me? Do it. The worst that they could do is say no. And yeah, your feelings get hurt. It sucks. Rejection's the worst. But my favorite story in the Bible, Jesus feeds the 5,000. And then a few days later, people are like, we want food. And he's like, no, I'll give you the bread of life. And do you know how people responded? See ya. They left. Thousands of people abandoned Jesus that day. And he looks at his disciples and goes, are you going to leave too? And they go, Lord, to where else would we go? And he goes, all right, well, there's my pruning process. I just took this mega church down to 12. Let's go. Right. And that happened. That's ministry, right? Like, this whole process is people saying, I'm not interested. And it sucks. But at the end of the day, God doesn't ask you to be liked by everybody. God doesn't ask you to lead everybody. God gives you what he gives you, parable of talents, and you are a good steward of that. Right. And God gives you names. God gives you a feeling. God gives you something. Be a good steward of that the whole way through. I can talk about this stuff all day. All right. 5 things you should not do. Number 1, don't reinvent the wheel. One of my biggest things with churches are churches who move into a building and then go, we need a food pantry. And it's like, there's 12 food pantries that are understocked. Focus on those, right? You don't need to do something that someone else in your community is already doing. What you need to do is you need to serve that and make that better, right? Now, there's a huge gap in our city when it comes to abuse of women and like sex trafficking. And that's a huge tension for us. We partner with an organization in Baltimore called the Samaritan Woman. That's incredible. And we love them, but like, we want something like that in Frederick. And so the thing is, that's something that we need to put our attention to. But like, everything downtown that we serve with, they all have food pantries. We just figure out how to stock their food pantry. Right. And I get it. Like, you put a food pantry on your site and people come to your building and all that. Like, I get it. But for us, like, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? We partner with organizations that do things well so that we can help them do that well. We partnered with a race in the beginning. They needed 25 volunteers. We brought 25 volunteers. 5 of those people from the race came to our next worship night. Cause again, we had something to move them to. People who bumped into us who were like, tell me a little bit more about Collective. Is like, hey, in 2 weeks, we're doing a worship night. We'd love to see you. All 5 of those people showed up, became team members. And all 5 of those people are still part of Collective. And again, one of them is on staff because, we partnered with an organization. We didn't reinvent the wheel. And then we also had something to move them to. So we partner right now with Blessings in a Backpack, West Frederick Middle School, which is where we met, the Downtown Frederick Partnership. And what's really cool about this is if you serve well, those organizations will build credibility for you by saying, hey, check out what Collective did. You don't have to do that. Like, if you are good at what you do, if you do it well, if you do it intentionally, those organizations that have credibility in your city will give you credibility. And if you are in places where people are not interested in church and not interested in Jesus, that is one of the best ways that you can break down some of those barriers, is let other people break down those barriers for you. The Frederick Rescue Mission in our city is one of the best organizations around, and we support them like crazy. And when they say, hey, we're so thankful for Collective, the amount of people that then come and check out our stuff and go, wait, what is this church all about? Because I love the Frederick Rescue Mission. I love helping guys in recovery. I love feeding people who have need. I love helping people financially that are struggling. You're telling me a church helps with that? Let me learn a little bit more. And so one of the best things you can do is not reinvent the wheel, but partner with good organizations. Now, if you don't have good organizations, then maybe God's telling you to start one of those. That's not my jam. We did Collective. I don't need another nonprofit. I've worked at those churches where we did both. And I can tell you, neither were good. They were both okay. And, at this point, the church that I worked at that had a nonprofit, the nonprofit's dead. But what really stunk is they gathered about 20,000 pounds of food every year, and now they gather zero because they couldn't do both. But there are organizations in the city that were already doing it. All they had to do is partner with that organization, and it would have been so much easier, right? So we partner with organizations that do things well, and we just fill those gaps for them because we try not to reinvent the wheel. Number 2, don't be crappy. Every time I teach this at Exponential, people get very uncomfortable because I'm just, going to call them out on this. If you're going to hand out coffee, hand out good coffee, right? We hand out Starbucks. Starbucks isn't good coffee, I know, but it's Starbucks, right? We don't brew our own coffee because it won't taste good, right? So if we're going to do it well. If you're going to hand out a t-shirt, make sure it's the most comfortable t-shirt that you can buy. We tell people we would buy less of a higher quality product than more of a low quality product. We buy t-shirts that are too expensive and people wear them all the time because they're comfortable. And so people walk around with a shirt that says 1745 on it, which is the year that Frederick was founded. When we did our capital campaign, that was one of our main things is we're not doing a new work. God's been working in this city for hundreds of years. What we're doing is we're trying to move that work forward, right? We're not the savior. He's been here. But what we know is God's asked us to do this thing. So let's continue what he's already been doing. We've got these, they're black, say 1745. They've got a map of our city in the background of it. And again, it's the most comfortable shirt you will ever wear. And people rock that thing all the time. And you'll be downtown and people go, 1745, what is that? And they go, oh, it's the year Frederick was founded. Our church did a capital campaign for a building, but the whole thing is about God's been here for a long time. We're just continuing that work. Boom, just like that. Same thing, our baptism shirts don't say baptism on them. They're actually a skull. Half of it's dead and half of it has a floral design. It's a tattoo style. And if you get baptized, that's a shirt that we let you get baptized in it, or that's what we give you just to signify that. And I've met people who've walked downtown and people are like, dude, that shirt is incredible. And they're like, oh, I was baptized at my church and this is the shirt they gave me. But the thing is, people don't ask those questions if you have bad stuff, right? If the shirt is not comfortable, they're not wearing it. And so if you're going to do t-shirts, do comfortable t-shirts. If you're going to do Frisbees, this is my thing. If you do Frisbees, make sure they fly. I worked at a church that handed out Frisbees and none of them were Frisbees. They were too small and they didn't go anywhere. And do you know what those things do? They end up in the trash. And you guys just wasted money. It's a bad stewardship thing. If you're going to do mugs, I don't know if you guys have met Tim Cole yet. Tim, this is Tim's thing. If you do mugs, get 12 ounces, don't do 8. No one drinks 8 ounces of coffee, right? If you do 8 ounces and you drink coffee with a little cream, a little sugar, that's 6 ounces of coffee. Who drinks 6 ounces of coffee? If you do mugs, get some that people actually want to pull out of their thing first. I have 2 Waypoint mugs and they're my first 2 mugs I pull out all the time because they're bigger than all my other mugs, right? And the thing is it costs a little bit more money, but do it well. I know money is tight and I know that's hard, but again, buy less high quality items rather than more crappy items. This also means you evaluate everything you do. If some things aren't working, don't do it. And here's the bigger thing. If your handouts or your giveaways are crappy, before they ever meet your church, you know what they're going to think about your church? They're going to think it's cheap and crappy. And people have been sold that version of Christianity for a very long time, right? If you do not do things well, people assume that your church is not a good church. And this is all, again, first impression stuff. So think about it this way. So instead of don't be crappy, think about it this way. What first impression are you giving? When you meet people in public, what first impression are you giving? I could even take this a step further in pre-launch, but I even still do that now. If I ask somebody to meet with me, I will always buy their coffee. I will always buy their beer. I will always buy their lunch. Do I have a budget for it? Kind of, right? What I sacrifice is stuff for me as a pastor. What I sacrifice is what other pastors do, where they're like, oh yeah, like I've got a budget for travel. I don't have that, right? When I travel, it's on my own dime because I'd rather buy somebody coffee. But the thing is that if that's the first sit down you have with them, give the first impression that you're a generous person, that you're a caring person, that you're thinking about them, right? So what first impression are you giving? And again, I'm talking about like giveaway stuff, but this is across the board, right? Everything that you do, think about it. What is my first impression? Because that might be their only impression of Jesus. Context wise, for like when you do church, I think it's Andy Stanley says people make a decision about whether or not they're going to come back within the first like 30 seconds, right? Because it's that foyer mentality. When they walk into your home, how do they feel? Most people think that's their church. That's your parking, right? If you're so focused on the front doors that you neglect parking, people who show up that do not want to go to church, if they don't know where to park, if there's no one out there to greet them, do you know what happens? Anxiety. Do you know what Satan does? They don't want you here. They don't have a place for you. This place is too big for you. They're not thinking about you. How do they even get into the door if you don't think about how they're getting into your parking lot, right? If you're doing things in your home, do not rely on Google Maps, right? It's 50-50. They send you to somebody else's house, right? What we do with our small groups is we take a picture of the home and we put it online. And yeah, like there's some stuff with that. We've navigated like, hey, like I host a group and I had a stalker at one point. And I was like, oh, cool. We're not really sure how to do that. So now when you look at groups, they're all private. But when you ask to join a group and you your name shows up, it's not public anymore. But when your name shows up on somebody's list, our leaders have an email that they send out to say, this is where to go. This is the front door. Like this is what the front of the house looks like. This is where you park, right? We have them say like, hey, we're a shoes off house. So when you walk in, go ahead and take your shoes off, right? Because nobody wants to walk into a home and go, do I take my shoes off or do I leave them on? Right? That's weird. Like, and immediately you start like getting this disconnect for people. So again, this is about giveaways, but the whole way through, it's true. What first impression are you giving? Number 3, don't depend solely on your partner churches for team members. And we talked about this already. You know, churches that say they'll send people, they probably won't. Especially right now, guys, like maybe a few years ago, but churches are trying to get people in their own doors. They're not sending people with you. Our best, like my mentor's church was like, hey, if you can better serve in Frederick, you should go. And there are a ton of people that live in Frederick and drive 45 minutes to their church. But as soon as he said, if you could better serve, who defines serve? Right? What he's talking about is Sunday morning. Like if you can serve better on Sunday morning, you should go there. But these people are already plugged in, right? They've already got rhythms. They've already got schedules. They've already got plans. Like no one's going to break that to come to a church where you're going to have to serve every single week until we're big enough to get enough people, right? And it meant well. And eventually, again, people moved and they came. But most churches aren't sending people to you. You have to do the grind yourself. Number 4, don't compromise vision. It's another thing we screwed up. We wanted so badly to hit that 40 number that we compromised vision. We had a family that had a lot of kids, and they had, by a lot, I mean, there were 13 people in their family. And so we're like, yo, that's a launch team. And their teenage children wanted to serve in our kids ministry, but their adults, the parents wouldn't put their kids back there. Instead of me saying, hey, this doesn't make sense that like you'll serve in this place, but you won't put your kids back there because they're like nervous about what we were teaching. So they had their kids sit in a hallway in like color during our preview services. And I should have said no to that. Straight up. I compromised vision. If I think Collective Kids is where kids are supposed to be, I should have told that family, no. The hallway with a coloring book is not better than what was a cafeteria with our kids ministry stuff. And the thing is, that was just small. That was small, but that led to eventually them not liking the way that we did groups. It led to them not liking the way that I lead. It led to, and them feeling like, oh, well, we're not going to do this. You know, we don't like this. We're not going to do this. And eventually, do you know what they did? They left. They left. And before they left, they took people with them. Before they left, they sent out an email to every email they could find saying, we're starting a better version of Collective. You should come with me. And the thing is, it's my fault, right? Like, yeah, whatever. Like, you know, we can talk about their own faith, their own Jesus stuff, whatever. It's my fault from the very beginning. I compromised vision, and it hurt our small groups. It hurt our team. It hurt our church. So before Collective ever started, we broke that 40 number. We got up to like 47, and we had 15 people leave in July. the day before a preview service, right? So we dropped down to 32 people. And I can tell you right now, that second preview service was better than the first. There were less people. There was a healthier culture. And that's my fault. And I sat down with our church, the 30 of us that day after we tore down, and I said, I'm sorry. That's my fault. I compromised vision. Like, your children in our church, the best place for your children is not in main service. I'm going to talk about some heavy stuff. If you want your kids to hear about depression and suicide and pornography, you want to hear that, like, put your kids in there. But if you don't want that, Collective Kids is the best place for your kids. And I didn't do that. And now we do. We have that conversation regularly. We don't do a disclaimer on our services when we talk about heavy stuff, because your kids shouldn't be in there anyways if they're under 6th grade. If they're 6th grade and above, they should be in there, because 6th graders, they're probably on TikTok. They know this stuff, right? So I compromised vision, and I hurt our church, and I hurt people, and that's my fault. Do not compromise vision. Here's the last thing, and this is the most important. Don't give up. Like, just don't give up. There will be weeks when you are killing it. People are showing up, groups are growing, leaders are being developed. And there will be weeks where you feel like you are spinning your wheels. Like I said, we went from, so I actually have the numbers here. Our team went from 49 adults to 36 adults in 5 days. But don't give up. Right? If God's called you to do this, you will be okay. Right? If God has asked you to do this, why would he abandon you when something bad happens? Right? You cannot give up. I read this last night. Let's see if I can find it. It's Galatians 6. I'm just gonna paraphrase it because I'm not gonna get my notes open in time. It says, like, you're doing good work. Like, the harvest is plentiful. Do not give up. Right? When the time is right. And that's what this is. Like, that's what pre-launch is. That's what COVID is. Like, all of us who are thinking, oh, this is the end. It's like, no. Like, the harvest is just becoming more plentiful during this season. And again, I said this at the beginning, where else are people going to go? In the past year, they've tried everything. They've tried to find peace in politics. They've tried to find peace in, fads. They try to find peace on social media. And guess what people aren't finding? Peace. The one thing they haven't had the opportunity to fully do in the last year is be in church, worshiping with people, hearing God's word together, serving together. And we know that's the key. But don't give up. And I'm going to read this verse to you guys. This last thing. We talk about this all the time in our church. It's 2 Kings 3. This is actually the Message version. But this is what it says. So he then said, which is the prophet, they were, going to Moab, and these 3 armies were teaming up, and they weren't even gonna make it there because they ran out of water. They're all gonna die before they ever got there. And they're like, we need something, like, somebody tell us something. And so one of the prophets came forward and talked to God. And this is what the prophet came back to them and said. It says, he then said to the prophet, God's word, dig ditches all over this valley. Here's what will happen. You won't hear the wind, you won't see the rain, but this valley is going to fill up with water, and your army and your animals will drink their fill. This is easy for God to do. And so I tell my team and my staff and our people all the time is dig ditches. Dig ditches. We do what we can do, so God can do what only God can do, right? And ditch digging is the worst. If you've ever had to dig a ditch, put in a fence, it's not good. It hurts your hands. It's sweaty. You get a few feet down, you hit rock. You got to figure out how to get through that. I just dug post holes at my house. I'm putting up this like privacy fence thing. And it took me 6 hours to dig 2 holes, 24 inches deep. And the thing is, like, it was hard work. But the thing is, God asks us to dig ditches, to do what we can do so God can bring rain. So God can fill those things up. And what you guys are doing right now is you are digging ditches. And the thing is, ditches aren't fun. You don't take a step back from a ditch and go, that's a good ditch, right? You go, that's dirty, that's muddy, I'm tired. But you do that so God can do the rest. And really, that's what you guys are doing right now. You are digging ditches. Keep digging ditches. Keep fighting. Keep pushing, right? Keep doing what God has asked you to do, and God will bring fruitfulness to that. You define what fruitfulness is, really. You define those wins, but God will do it if you keep working. And I know this is hard, and you guys are trying to do this in the middle of a season where everybody's afraid of everything and it stinks, but it's necessary. We need more people like you starting and doing movements of God that this world desperately needs, that they don't really understand yet. So don't give up. And when you get to that place of where you're like, hey, I can't do this anymore, the really cool thing is you've got this group of people right here that you guys can rely on. And every single person that speaks to the cohort of the course of this year, we're here for you guys. You know, not one person who is shared would turn down an email or a phone call from you if you needed it, right? We're here for you. And we want to help you. Just, remember, like, it'll be worth it. Lives will be changed. It just might take a while to figure out what that looks like.
Thank you, Michael. So if you have any questions for Michael, think about those right now. Michael, I've got a question for you. When it comes to, you talked about, having people on your team and, not everyone being fully on board. I think some of that has to do with, like, some church planters, have a worse rate of people being involved who said they're on the team because of a lack of clear expectations. What were the expectations that you had for people joining your launch team, and how did you, like, get them to commit, saying, I'm in, here's my commitment? Sometimes churches use a covenant, but what did you do?
That's a loaded question, because Sean knows that we did this well and then also didn't do this well. So we created expectations for our team. We said, hey, if you're a launch team member, we expect you to be in a group. We expect you serving in some capacity, whether that was with us on Sunday mornings when we did previews, or in the community, because we're doing a lot of community events. And we expected them to give. And we did not do a covenant, just because non-Christian people are like, what is this? This is weird. So what we did was, actually have some on the floor. We handed out blocks that say pray for collective on them. And any person that came to any event that was, like, not like serving in the community, but any, like, worship night or vision night or anything like that, we asked them to take these home. And we told them straight up, like, hey, here's the deal. Even if this isn't your flavor of church, we need prayer. So start there. And there's still people who never came to our church that have these blocks in their house, and they, like, send me pictures of them, or, like, we're friends with them. And they're like, hey, I still pray for collective all the time. And it's like, yeah, I feel that, because God has done things in this church that don't make any sense. I'm not a good leader. I'm temperamental. I had never preached more than 2 weeks in a row before starting collective. I did 2 weeks once. And then I did, like, a summer camp. And then all of a sudden it was like, I should plan a church. Collective should not be seeing what it's seeing. And it's on the backs of these people on the team, on our leaders, and on the prayers of strangers even. So we handed this block out, and then we said, hey, if you're ready to make this commitment and join this team, we want you to sign the other side of it. And we had this big wall. And what we would do is we'd put them on the wall. And so we used to have that for a long time, this whole thing. Like, I got a bunch, they're all on my floor right now, because I just took the board down. Holloways. This is part of the Penningtons. There's another block somewhere. And people would sign these blocks and put them on the board. And that meant, one, our team knew there's clarity, like, we're all in this together. And two, it's just a good visualization of, like, hey, collective isn't about Michael. It's not about a document that you sign, like a covenant. Like, it's about, like, this whole group of people being the church. Now, here's the mistake. I still think that's a good idea. I always tell people to steal this idea, just do it better. My church planner in North Carolina that I'm coaching kind of did the same thing. Their church called Canvas. They bought these little canvases that people fill out, and someone designed this, like, really incredible, like, big canvas that they put it on. It's like, dang, dude, like, take that idea, make it better. Here's the mistake. I never should have asked for people to give as part of the pre-launch commitment. For us, a lot of people on our team were not followers of Jesus. And here I was trying to hold them accountable to give when they have no obligation to do so, right? So if you are trying to reach lost people, it's really hard for you to tell them, hey, here's what the Bible teaches we should be doing, because they don't know why. What ended up happening was, when we launched Collective, a lot of those people who are not followers of Jesus, who are like, hey, I'm doing what you asked me to do. And it's like, no, you're doing this out of faithfulness. Oh no, you're not a follower. There's no faithfulness there. They literally were giving because Michael told them to. They were serving because Michael told them to. So the thing is, you just have to be very careful, and you have to be more thoughtful than I was when it comes to, hey, what are the expectations and what are the clarities and what's the commitment level? If I had to do this again, what I would do is I would just say, hey, joining the team for us means you serve with us, right? I wouldn't even do groups, and here's why. And this is what we do right now. We don't do membership. If you're part of the team, it's because you serve. Because groups are about me, right? Groups are, I'm going someplace and a leader is giving me things. They're pouring into me, right? But serving is about you, about creating space for my friends, about creating space for my families, about creating space for our neighbors to come and experience Jesus. And those are two very different things. Now, again, I told you this, mature Christians know that when you serve, you get filled up just as much. right? When you give to others, you get filled up just as much. But I would have adjusted that and said, hey, launch team means you serve with us, right? I don't care if you go to a group. Groups are good. Groups are not better than for us. Groups are not better than what we do on Sunday morning. Groups for us, bucket wise, thing called bucket theology. Brian Jones teaches on it. It's one of my favorite things. Our first bucket is Sunday morning. Our second bucket is not groups like most churches. Our second bucket is serving the community. And those are the two things we try to do better than anybody else. Groups are third. And even that's about to switch because youth is going to be third, because I've got young kids who are growing up, and that's more important to me than a small group that I attend. I love my small group. It's just saying that like it is not the number one priority for us. And we created this culture in the beginning that all three of those things were equal, and they're not. Now, what that means though for you is, and just like a little extra advice, you've got to figure out what your first bucket is, right? Like what is the most important thing you do at your church? So, for what Chad's doing, his most important thing is going to be like discipleship, but realistically, like small groups are in your home. And that's going to be Chad's first bucket. And Chad's going to put his time and energy and resources into that bucket. And when that bucket is full, then he'll start looking to the next thing. And a lot of churches that do kind of a missional minded disciple making movement, if they do that one thing really well, they will get to a point where they're like, oh, there's a lot of people here. What do we do now? Okay, what's the next bucket? And a lot of churches will end up going, okay, well, our next bucket is, well, let's do services on Sunday morning. And maybe it's not every Sunday, it's that kind of thing. But for us, like our first bucket is Sunday morning. So we should have just said, hey, like being a part of the launch team means you serve with us. And then we'd love for you to join a group. We'd love for you to give, but ultimately that's your choice. So we do that now. So if you're on the team, it's because you serve in some capacity, Sunday morning, during the week, all that. Because our staff is built that way. My staff oversees that. They get more care that way. And like I said, number 2 is our community. Number 3 are our groups. Groups are still important. We still talk about them from stage. But we don't put as much energy into them because we're not putting our resources toward them. So they're not equal with the other 2 things.
And so when you're, one thing that I hear, a lot from church planters is one mistake is not getting their launch team to give during pre-launch.
Sure.
So would you say like, okay, you might not make it as clear of an expectation to like joining the team, but is it something that if you did it again, you would still cast the vision for, hey, this might not be one of the number 1 expectations, but we would want you to contribute, now.
Yeah, absolutely. So we use Planning Center Online, and we had it set up a year in advance. Because it usually takes 9 months for people to start giving realistically. But we would say, hey, like if I had to do it again, what I would say is, hey, like if you are a part of this team, like if you're going to invest in this community, other ways that you can do that is by giving. And, like it's set up. And if this is your church, this is what you should be doing. So we would talk about it still. We talked about it